Welcome back, everybody. Draskyl here with another video. Today, we're still talking about counters. This time, it's going to be itemization counters. What you can do to stop specific types of things from happening in the game, or ways to prepare for whatever lineup that you're playing against. So, really quickly, this is a very broad subject, so we're going to talk about certain items and when they are the best, and when they are probably not as useful as other things. So when we're doing this video, the main thing that we're going to keep in mind is we're looking at this mostly from the support perspective, because I feel like this is the thing that a lot of people kind of mistake when they buy items. And since you only have a limited amount of gold as a support player, you're normally, the money that you spend is the only money you're going to get a lot of the games. So when we're looking at items, a lot of the commonly purchased ones that you see nowadays, you know, you have your Holy Locket, you have Urn, Medallion, Glimmer, Force Staff, Lens, depending on what hero you're playing. There are a lot of items, and I think people really kind of get confused as to which one is the best in any given situation. So without much context, I'm going to do my best to explain when the items are strong and when they're just not very strong. And a lot of this stuff should be common sense when you're trying to eliminate possibilities for items, but I think even in the games that I play, roughly the low immortal bracket, you know, high divine, low immortal, there are still a ton of people who buy items with the wrong perception of what the item actually does in the game. So let's start off by going to Medallion, because this is one that sees a lot of purchase, especially at high MMR. This is probably one of the most bought items for a support, regardless of whether you're a 4 or a 5. And this item serves a bunch of purposes. The first one, obviously, is armor and mana regen, which is fantastic. It's really good for basically any 4 or 5 player. The offensive medallion is really useful for when your team is poor at taking Roche. Now, we're not going to talk too much about timings here because it is an itemization video, but whenever your lineup is strong in lane but struggles to take Roche, just having a medallion gives you the ability to kill it that much easier, and there's probably someone on your team who wants this pressed on them or wants this pressed on the enemy. So as far as items go, where you can kind of just buy it a lot of the time and it's probably okay, I'd say Medallion is up there. Now, if you're playing Lion or Shadow Shaman or one of these other heroes that either wants a mobility item, or you want to buy something like a Lens, which I don't recommend Lens that often, and I'll explain a little bit on that later when we get to it. But this is a purchase that is pretty good for any hero that doesn't want to build a blink. We'll just say that. So if your hero doesn't build a blink, you build this item, and it's obviously very powerful against teams that have a lot of minus armor. It's very powerful when your team has a lot of physical damage, and it's also very powerful when your team is going to win their lanes, but they are not going to be able to take Roche that easily, or they might even struggle with just objectives in general. So we talked a little bit about Medallion. We're going to move on. We're going to talk about something that's quite a bit more expensive in the Spirit Vessel, and we're going to talk about Holy Locket too. But as far as Vessel goes, there are plenty of games where this item is attractive, but I would caution a lot of people going from just Urn to all the way to Spirit Vessel if the enemy team has a lot of stuns. So the reason why I feel this way about Vessel is that oftentimes when you go from Urn, you have this 840 gold item. To get to Vessel, you're spending 2,000 gold. So theoretically, you're finishing this item because you're playing against a Morphling or an Alk or some high health team that does not have inherent dispels. This is a really important thing to remember. If the enemy team has dispels in their kit, so like Legion Commander, Abaddon, Omni Knight, anyone who buys Manta relatively early in their item progression, this item loses a ton of value. So when do you buy it? You can buy it against heroes like Bristleback. You can buy it against any of the strength pool. It's going to be solid into, for the most part. There will be a solid point of time where this item will just be very, very impactful. You'll deal a lot of damage. You'll have good sustain for the team, all that other stuff. But I don't believe that finishing this item all the time is really necessary, as long as you understand how your team works, and if you need something else like a Force Staff or a Glimmer to keep people alive, I feel in general it's better to prioritize saving your own cores rather than just going all in and trying to kill the enemy. So if the enemy team has Lion Centaur, for example, 2 heroes in the offlane that stun, instead of committing the 2,000 gold, you could almost have a Force Staff, and that Force Staff could just save someone's life, which is it's automatically more impactful than a Spirit Vessel. We're talking about the cost versus what it could potentially give you. So again, when to not buy this item, enemy team has dispels, they're going to build items that dispel themselves very early on in the game. Next, we have Holy Locket. This item has been seeing a lot of play, especially in pro games. This item has been buffed, I don't even know how many patches in a row now. It's been buffed many, many times. The build-up is pretty solid. It's 2 boosters, the point booster and the energy booster. So you have this really nice... Oh, I'm thinking Aeon, excuse me. Yeah, I'm thinking of Aeon. The build-up is still really good for this, though, because you want Wand anyway. A lot of heroes love to build energy booster and get, like, arcane boots. Headdress is okay for the lane. Fluffy hat's okay for the lane. And then you really just have a recipe. So the build-up has become a lot more pleasant for the 4 and the 5 positions. This is another item, though, where unless your hero has something in their kit that heals, notably Winter Wyvern is probably the one that you're going to see the most. I don't see too much Undying being played, but this is another one of those heroes that you look at the item and it seems very attractive because you can get a really big burst heal that's going to circumvent any sort of damage coming out on the enemy. So this is really nice when, even if the enemy team has stuns, if you have another heal to apply on top of this and you get the Holy Blessing passive, the 35% additional healing, and you can keep someone alive through burst, this is a great choice. The other thing is that since it gives you a decent amount of HP as well, because you get 250 health and 3 all stats, if you are susceptible to being bursted in a stun, then this is also a nice choice. So when heroes on the other team have ways to close the gap and stuff, and can blink stun you, this item gains more value. It's better against blink stuns than a Force Staff because blink stun doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to use your item, right? So the counter to Force Staff is just dying before you can react. And there's other items that can counter that aspect of it that we'll talk about a little bit later. But this item is pretty okay. I think there's really only 3 or 4 heroes that typically are going to buy this in any game. Wyvern Undying, maybe something like Omni or Dazzle, and Abba, I suppose, if you're into that. So there are some heroes that can definitely benefit from this item. But I do caution, if there are a lot of stuns on the enemy team, probably still just buy a Force Staff. And then just rely on your positioning to make sure that you're not the guy getting stunned, and then you push this item on the guy that's getting chain CC'd, and he just gets to walk away. The way that I would normally look at itemization when referring to supports is that if there is too much damage for you to be able to keep a guy alive through a locket or like a mech or whatever, if the single target damage is just super, super high, Force Staff is basically mandatory.
One forgotten notification later.
Okay. Moving on in items, now we have Glimmer. Glimmer is an item that I feel a bit polarized about. It is obviously still strong. The ability to get away is super powerful. And I view this item as something that gets stronger the later the game goes. And when you are in the ultra late game, the reason why it becomes better is because oftentimes the scary heroes that can jump on you and kill you, aka the cores, they're not going to have room for their own detection. So this is a much better late game item, I believe, in a lot of cases than early game. Unless there is just so much magic damage and someone else on your team already has a Force Staff that you feel the need to buy this, then I think it's okay. I believe that a lot of people buy it and it's not really necessary, and a Force Staff can do a similar thing, maybe just better. Mainly because positioning is just so powerful in Dota that if you're just not standing in a bad spot, you automatically just get to live. Like if you're out of range of spells, you just get to walk away. So I normally think, when I'm debating between Glimmer and Force Staff, does the magic resist, like if there's an axe on the enemy team or something like that and you can't force the guy away and there's magic damage follow-up, then I would consider Glimmer because I know that I won't be able to Force Staff that guy to safety. But if there is no one that really makes you turn, or your allies are paying attention to their positioning and stuff and you can Force Staff them away, then I typically just see Force Staff as a better item just in general. But this is kind of This is personal preference, I would say. It's not just guaranteed that Force Staff's always going to be better than Glimmer. There are obviously going to be cases where you can buy it. The games where I would definitely not buy it, if you ever see a hero like Bounty Hunter, don't even bother. Like, just do not buy that item at all. Heavy physical lineups, you really don't need this item. Obviously, it only gives you magic res, minus armor is just going to kill you anyway. And any decent level bracket of Dota, people are going to be carrying Dust. So, probably don't buy it in a lot of those games either. So, moving on to the next items, we have Mech. Mech has gotten buffed a lot as well, and it does have a decent aura now on top of it, and only costs 100 mana. So this thing has been buffed to basically being useful again, but I would say that as a 4 or a 5, this item is very hard to fit into your inventory, and it's oftentimes left... If you do need aura items that badly, it's probably better that your offlaner buys it, or your mid player buys it, or somebody, you know, somebody that's not the 4 at least. If you're a 5, and you're playing some hero like Dazzle, and you have the cooldown reduction ability from Bad Juju, then this item gains a little bit more value. But the times you want to buy this, enemy team has a lot of spread damage, and not a lot of single target. So you think heroes, you know, like Phoenix, or Leshrac, or Puck, you know, these heroes that just kind of spread out damage in the fight, but they don't really necessarily burst any one hero in particular, that's the best time to get a Mech. If the enemy team has like an Ursa, or a Clinks, or a TA, or some other hero that has really high single target focus damage, this item is basically worthless, and you should not buy it. Because the 275 health offset is not going to protect that player. They're just going to die. For the price point, though, it's pretty good. The build-up isn't too bad. The headdress is nice for some heroes early, then it's just chainmail and a recipe. So it's not too out of reach. The other thing to remember that when you're buying Mech is that you are buying it to be near people. So if you're not playing with your team, or you're not planning on doing any sort of pushing maneuvers or anything like that, you can probably also scratch this thing off the list of items that you would want to buy. It's definitely not bought as much as the other support items, but it does have a place. As long as you know when it's correct, then it can definitely be useful. Vlad's we're not going to talk that much about, or drums, because these two items are kind of in weird spots where other items are just better relative to the cost point. Like Vlad's is 2,700, and it does give you some nice benefits, but it's just too expensive, and it doesn't really have an on-use effect that turns the tide of a fight. It's more of a static buff that we don't really care too much about. And drums is kind of in the same boat, where the use can be nice on some heroes, but more often than not, you're going to be better spending the 1,700 towards, you know, a Glimmer, a Force Staff, maybe even a Lens, or a Mech in most cases. So we really don't just look... we just don't look at those items very often. So now, Aether Lens. This is one that I find extremely situational, and it's more often than not what hero I am, more than it is what hero that we're playing against. This is an item that allows you to stand far away. So if you want to stand far away and you're playing Shaman, or Lion, or Wyvern, or one of these heroes, and you know that standing in the back is going to allow you to cast all your spells, and that is going to allow you to win the fight, then this item is good. This item is not good if you need catch. This item is not good if the enemy team is going to catch you. If they have blinks, or if they have really high mobility, it's also not good. You have to rely on standing in a good spot. Maybe you need a dagger, maybe you need a force. A way of protecting yourself. Sometimes even just having an Aeon disc in those types of games when the enemy team really wants to focus you in the beginning of the fight is way better than relying on something like this. Because at some point in the game, you're just going to get caught. And if you get caught with a lens in your inventory, you're just dead. You also cannot save your cores because you haven't bought another item that actually gives any protection. But there are situations where this item can be nice. Again, if you're playing the Lion, if you're playing the Shaman, and you can just sit in trees, and you know the enemy team is going to be like walking into you, and you have good positioning, then it can be fine. But more often than not, if you're 4 or 5 and you buy this item first, it's probably incorrect. Usually either the forest is better, or the dagger is better, or the urn is better, or whichever. There's probably a better purchase than Lens for your hero. Alright, so other items. Aeon is a bit expensive, but there are certainly cases for this when you just need to be able to cast your spells once. So the Wyverns, right? Those types of heroes. And you know that you're just going to get hard focused. this item can be very, very good to ensure that your spells go off. I wouldn't recommend buying it first in most games, unless you're very uncertain about your ability to live through the fights. I would normally look to something like positioning to fix that problem, but in some games, if there's a bunch of blinks and a bunch of stuns, then you might just need this. So think about what your hero wants to do in the fight. Where do I stand? You know, what spells do I need to use on whom before the fight is over? And if you feel like you can't do it without this, then you might have to buy Aeon. Good positioning, and these two items, I know I keep coming back to them, Glimmer and Force. It's mostly just because these are the best support items. They're so useful in so many different situations that there's just not really a good argument to skipping them a majority of the time. So now if you're playing a 4 or 5, there are a couple of items that I want to talk about that I would pretty much never want to see any of my supports buy, and I'll also explain why. So Atos, this item is purely for aggressive purposes. Sometimes Maranas build it, sometimes Pudge players build it. This item is pure greed. There is nothing about this item that offers anything but a little bit of added kill potential on some heroes. I suppose there are some like self-comboing, like we mentioned, the Puchuk and the Marana. I guess there's also Skywrath. Like these types of heroes would want it. The reason why I don't like it is because it's extremely one-dimensional. And that doesn't always mean it's bad every game. It just means it serves one purpose, kill. One purpose. The thing about Force Staffs and Glimmers is they can be used in different ways. They can be aggressive, they can be defensive. One button press can save a hero's life on your team. So I typically don't like seeing this sort of thing. Mostly because it's also kind of expensive, right? $27.50. That's more than either of the items that I mentioned before. The games where you can buy this are if the enemy team just has no way to dispel, and they also have mobility, which is very rare. Like when I say rare, I mean maybe 1 in 100 Dota games you're going to run into that situation. Because the heroes who have mobility naturally build into dispel items. Like Puck builds Yules. AMs build Manta. Even stuff like Centaur, who are just really tanky heroes that just want to run away, they also build stuff like Lotus. So there's a ton of items that people are going to get in the game where it's going to counter this Atos, and it's going to happen a lot of the time faster than you can even get it. So I would highly discourage anyone from building this item on a 4 or 5. So talking about more items that are very good at countering specific things, Lotus is a luxury item for sure. This is, we'll say, on the high end of support income. $38.50 is a lot of money, especially for a 5. If you can get your hands on one, it's extremely useful in games where the enemy team just has a lot of single target spells. Like your Shamans, your Lions, even stuff like Lina. If you want to reflect stuff like Omni Slash from Jug, that's also really good. The cool thing about Lotus is that it can be applied preemptively, and it also gives good regen and a good amount of armor. So if you have this and you can apply it to your core is going to be really happy that you have this item. It also applies the softest spell, which can be great. Heroes that this absolutely crushes: the Lions, the Shamans, the Wyverns. Anyone who wants to cast their spells in succession on your hero that are single target is going to get ruined by this. Those are probably the top 3 off the top of my head that I can think of that really, really hate playing into this item. Obviously, if you're Lotus, you can be cursed, but it's dangerous. You remove the Arctic Burn from Wyvern when you push this as well. So you're taking a lot of damage off of the Q that she's going to be throwing on. And then in Shaman Alliance case, it's pretty straightforward. You just get hit by your own spells. You know, you get hexed or you get impaled. Or even in some cases, you can get finger cast on you if you're not being careful, and it's pretty bad. Other heroes it's good against: Bat Riders who want to go in, they blink initiate, you preemptively Lotus your core, he lassos himself. It's just really kind of annoying stuff. So whenever you're thinking about, you know, what do I want to make? What's going to give me the biggest bang for my buck? Lotus is usually pretty low on that list because it's just really expensive. But if you ever find yourself just sitting on a pile of money and the enemy team has a lot of those single target abilities, this item is fan-friggin-tastic. So another one of the decently expensive but not too expensive items, Solarcrest. This is probably one of the premier support items just in the game. We talked about Medallion earlier. This is just better Medallion. It's more stats, it gives you movement speed, it gives you more mana, more armor, the debuff is more powerful, the buff itself is way more powerful, and the situations where you want to buy this are whenever you're trying to hard scale your one player. So if you have a mid player who does like a lot of magic damage, like a Puck or a Queen or some fighty type hero, and your offlaner is similar, but your safe lane is, you know, a Terrorblade or, you know, PL or whomever. It's really nice to have one of these because it just gives your carry that little bit of an extra edge, and also means that whenever you do need to kill Roshan, it dies way, way faster, and it makes it a lot safer too. So these items are pretty much the ones that you would normally see in any given game. There's a few more that we didn't really cover, and that's mostly because you probably shouldn't be buying them on support in the first place. You know, you have like your Falcon Blade, you know, Orb of Corrosion. Obviously, you're not going to be buying Midas most games on a support. But I think that pretty much does it for the reasonably acquired items. We did touch briefly on Blink Dagger as well. This is one that's basically just to the insta CC heroes. Lions, Shadow Shamans, they want this. Sometimes Pudge if you're playing it as support. If you really need to be able to get in, to be able to cast your spells, and the enemy team is scared of you, then this is going to be a really, really good purchase for obvious reasons. It's good as a fight starter. If you're not afraid to die and you're playing support and you have those CCs, just dagger away and you'll be able to find probably much better engagements based off that. We didn't really touch too much on Yules. This item is complicated. A lot of players will tell you that this item is extremely bad, especially high MMR players. And I don't necessarily disagree with the sentiment, but I do think that there are situations where this item can be very, very good as a counter to certain heroes. So if you don't like playing against Axe, you don't like playing against Ursa, any of these heroes that just want to like tunnel vision, go in, cast their spells, kill a guy, and you can stop that chain of momentum, I feel like this item has insane value. So if Ursa rages and you Yules him, he stays in the Cyclone for the full duration. Status effect does not have any effect on Yules whatsoever. So whenever you hear that noise and you see the Ursa turn red, you Yules him, he doesn't get any benefit from his ult, and he spends more time in the air, and then he lands, and then he's sad. For heroes like Troll Warlord and Axe, they go in, they push their spells, this Axe, Blink Calls, Blade Mails, you Yules the Axe, and then your cores aren't hitting themselves on Blade Mail. Or in Troll's case, if he doesn't have BKB, you can throw him up in the air. Earlier when we talked about Atos saying, this is one of those items that you should really never buy, the other reason why you shouldn't buy Atos is because Yules exists. And for the two of the three heroes that we said, the Pudge and the Mirana, this item also sets up their spells. So if you're a Pudge or a Mirana, you never want to buy Atos because you can just buy a Yules. If you're Skywrath, okay, maybe you still want this item once in a blue moon, but probably not that often. But there are plenty of cases where having an offensive dispel can be very powerful. As a defensive item, Yules is definitely worse. So as a support, if you do find yourself with a Yules in your inventory, you probably would need something before that to bridge the gap between like the early game and the mid game, or maybe even the late game, depending on how it's going. But there are a lot of item choices in Dota, and I think it's very important that people kind of think about what the enemy team wants to do, and then also what your team wants to do before you buy items. So like, an example. If the enemy team can really only kill you in burst and stuns, you know, what would you want to buy against that kind of team? Probably not a Mech, right? Because the Mech is only going to heal you for 275, and all these stuns and all these spells are going to be cast on one hero, and then that hero is just going to die. So maybe it's Glimmer, or maybe it's Force Staff. Because if a guy gets stunned and he's facing you and you force him away, then maybe the follow-up stun doesn't connect. And then all of a sudden the fight is very different because that guy didn't just get blown up. There's, I think I'm forgetting one item. I am forgetting one item. Is it Meteor Hammer? Yeah, I don't think we touched on this much. If you are a 4 or 5 and you are buying this item first, you are probably wrong. And by wrong, I mean, I see a lot of Treant Protectors specifically build this first, I would caution anyone against building this as a first item, mainly because if you are a hero that wants to buy it, there's probably something else that your team wants from you. So in Treant's case, your best spell is Overgrowth. And a lot of the time, it's very hard to get a good Overgrowth off in a team fight because your hero is naturally very slow, and if you're fighting, especially towards the middle of the map, there are tree lines, but it can be kind of tricky to get your spells off and have any real sort of impact. If you're buying a Meteor Hammer, what you're saying is, I don't want to attend the fights. Because the best way to play with this item normally, especially as a Treant, is to just occupy a side lane and spam waves. So that means as a support, you're taking waves and you're playing away from your team, basically not supporting. So the reason why I discourage people from this item is that it kind of enforces bad habits. Whereas if you have items in your inventory that make you ready to fight, then you are more prone to fight. And typically as a support, your job is to be there for the core. You're either stacking or you're fighting with him or you're pushing an objective with him. And if you're not with that guy, then something else has to be happening on the map that is worthwhile. And I do feel like the vast majority of the community probably can't decide which one is the best at any given point. So if you can't figure out how you want to play the game, try to buy items that you think your cores would want you to have so that you can play with them and then plays can happen based on that. So identify who's strong, play with that guy, build items for that guy, and you'll probably have a lot more success. So I believe that covers most of the stuff. Helm of the Dominator is... it's pretty much just not used. Like, I don't really know how else to say it. This item is just not purchased. It used to be pretty good back when Necronomicon was still in the game, but it's been removed. So the heroes that used to buy it just don't really buy it anymore. Everything else is just really expensive. Like, we could talk about, you know, Aghanim Scepter, but it's very niche based on hero. We could talk about Hex, but it's insanely expensive. When we're talking about support items specifically, we're looking for things that mostly cost less than 4,000 gold, because that's usually the amount of money you're going to have to spend, and sometimes maybe it's even less. There are things like Veil, which I do think also have a lot of value in certain situations. If your team just has a ton of magic damage, like you're a Phoenix, or you have like a Sand King on your team, some mid-hero that does a lot of magic damage too, like Lesh, and you want to buy this, I think stuff like that's okay. Playing into your strengths is always going to be fine. But hopefully this video was a little bit instructional. As far as the Aghanim shards go, I can't go over every single hero by name in this video, but I just wanted to give people a basic rundown of what items are good, when they're useful, you know, what they do against their opponents and such. So I hope you guys learned a little bit. If you guys want to check me out live on Twitch, you can do so at twitch.tv/Draskyl, same as in the YouTube. And hope you guys are all doing great, and we'll see you next time.